Hello, and welcome back to Why This Film, the podcast where we reach back into your childhood, pluck out a movie, give it a rewatch, and have a chat about it. I'm Emily Slade, and welcome back. You watched it so many times before, and now you're gonna watch it again. But it's been so many years since you last saw it, and now you show it to your friends, and they're like, what?
What am I watching?
Why this film? Today I'm joined by Ben from The Conversation Hat. Hello!
Hello! How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Not bad. Slightly damp, but that's the weather.
It is quite damp.
That's not just some
I'm
thing
fogging
that's wrong
up
with
here.
me.
I'm going to just take them off for the time being. Because your movie is The Pagemaster, 1994.
Yeah.
And I need to read the IMDb breakdown without my glasses on. A cowardly boy who buries himself in accident statistics enters a library to escape a storm, only to be transformed into an animated illustration by the Pagemaster. He has to work through obstacles from classic books to return to real life. So Ben, why this film?
Why this filmed? Because this was one of the first ones that I remember from childhood.
Nice.
And like Macaulay Culkin in it. I feel like Macaulay Culkin was a big part of my childhood.
Heyday in the 90s.
Pagemaster, Home Alone 1 and 2. Those are the only ones that we talk about.
Of course.
I've not seen the one with Aisling B. I like Aisling B.
Oh, is that the most recent one?
Yeah.
Yeah. There is apparently a good one where, like, I think 4 is meant to be good because the implication is that the house is haunted. And that's why the robbers think that there's not a kid there. They think it's haunted. So I've heard. This is all alleged. I don't know.
What if it's
Put
like
in the comments what actually Home Alone 4 is about.
Maybe it's a horror and like Kevin died and it's the ghost of Kevin.
Why don't they just make that?
I think we should make that. Shall we stop this podcast and
Let's go make Home Alone 9 or whatever they're
Thank you for listening to Why This Film. We're off to be movie stars.
Richie Rich, that was
Richie
another
Rich
Macaulay
was another
Culkin.
one, yeah.
Although he's called Rich in this, so that was really confusing to me. I was like, why would you do that? Why didn't you think ahead?
Yeah. No,
Whoever wrote The Pagemaster.
Sort it out.
So what we're
Writer
talking,
who
like,
I didn't
taped
write
off
down.
the TV, VHS.
I think they were at my nan's house on VHS.
Oh, the best films are always at your nan's house. Were they in
Right.
like a corner cupboard behind a key?
It was one of the little sliding glass ones. Yeah.
They, honestly, all Grand's houses in the 90s had like a little secret cupboard where you'd open up and then like a magical VHS that was by a studio that's now like disbanded and like didn't really exist in the first place.
This
Dodgy
studio now makes
animation.
shoes.
Yeah. I love it.
There'd be
so
a handful
much.
of those and then lots of things about war.
yeah.
War films for Grandad, Sean Bean for Nan,
Nice.
and then a few DVDs, not
And
even
then,
DVDs, VHS.
Like 3 VHSs for you, like an off-brand Japanese version of The Little Mermaid, and like
The best one.
the best. It is the best one. I love it so much. That was my favourite. That was my Pagemaster. Repeat watch. Was this a?
Oh, multiple. Like it, as you said, it starts off with. Or in the early bits, it's him in a storm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think any time there was a rainy day, it was like, well, it's Pagemaster weather.
Oh, I love
We need to sit and watch the storm.
Pagemaster.
It's got a film. There's a film with a storm in it. There's a storm happening now. Let's.
So true. That's such a wonderful like insertion into the film of being like the pathetic fallacy of it all. Like that's wonderful. I love it.
What did you just call me?
Fallacy.
Oh no, and a pathetic one at that.
Pathetic one at that.
Yeah, it was a repeat watch. It was maybe when my mum wanted to go and do something that wasn't look after kids. And we'd go round to Nan's house and pick a film. I want to watch The Pagemaster.
Amazing. So I had seen this film before, but only once. It was not one that was in my childhood. I would have been about... When was the Olympics? In the, 2000s?
Which one?
It would have been, early 2000s.
I don't know why I asked that as if it would matter. I won't know.
There was, an August that we went to Devon and stayed in, a little apartment. And the Olympics were on, and the apartment had, 3 VHSs for children. And 2 of them were, live action, so I, wasn't interested at all. And then one of them was The Pagemaster. And I'd obviously seen it on the shelves of the the blockbusters, if you will. I didn't have a blockbuster. I had a beer barrel, which was on the corner of the high street.
Interesting. Alcoholism instead of the film
And that's where you would
entertainment.
rent your videos from. It was like a corner shop where you'd get, if you were underage, you could get your alcohol, you'd get your cigarettes, you'd get your toxic wastes, and you'd get a VHS. And so I would see the Pagemaster on the shelves, but never quite pick it out because Ferngully was there, so why would you? My aim in life is to push the Ferngully agenda.
But Ferngully is amazing. We will be
back for Ferngully.
When I have time to find and rewatch Ferngully, probably about 3 times.
You can borrow my DVD. I also have Ferngully 2, which I've never seen.
Interesting, because I've never seen it because it was a sequel to...
and a sequel back in the days when sequels couldn't be trusted.
Yeah.
Like, we're not talking Shrek 2 era, we're talking, like, Mulan 2 era. Well, that's disingenuous because Mulan 2 wasn't bad. Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 era.
Yes.
That was bad.
It was, we've told the story, but we can make some money out of it for straight to DVD.
Yeah. Ooh, not as good. So I watched The Pagemaster on holiday, all this to say, and instantly forgot about it. And when I rewatched it last night in the bath, I remembered why I forgot about it, because there's sort of no plot, and that's okay.
It's surprising. Yeah, when I went back and watched it, I was amazed that it's like an hour and 15 minutes.
Literally, I was like, oh God, how long is it? Because I also need to get in the extended version of the Fellowship of the Ring for tomorrow. So how long have I taken out for Pagemaster? And it was like an hour 20. I was like, wow, that's the length of a Barbie movie.
You're welcome for...
Yes, for brevity.
For me picking a short film, so you didn't have to spend that much time. But it does feel... like there's stuff that goes on, but there's not a... It's this event leads to this event leads to this event, instead of we need to do so many complicated things.
Yeah, it's almost like a meandering... It's almost Alice in Wonderland-ish, which kind of works in its favour. I do think there is a potentially amazing movie within The Pagemaster, because who is it for? Were you getting the references when you were a kid?
Well, this is something that I quite liked about, and I've written in my little notes.
Yes.
So it feels like it is for kids almost... I don't know. For me, maybe when I was watching it, it felt more subtle than perhaps an adult watching it when it came out. Sort of like you can read books. I know you're watching a film at the moment, but look at all of the books.
Very 80s and 90s were like, hey kids, with these bippy boppy boo bars that are coming out now, like video games and the rise of the VHS and home entertainment, don't forget the old book, don't forget it. So you had like your Never-Ending Stories and your Labyrinths and all of these things that were pushing like, read books, kids, books are good.
Books are still a thing.
And this was almost like the ultimate version in the, like, it wasn't even just one book, it was like real books from real life, all men, all male books starring only men. Even though we literally go into the fantasy. It's fine. I will bring that point up later, and it's not a problem. It doesn't detract from it being good for... Because I was very much watching it as an adult, and I was like, I have notes. And then I was like, but if I was a kid... There's little sound bites that I 100% would have quoted all the time. There's like moments I would have really remembered. I fucking love that it is classic 90s in that, like, it's perfectly innocuous. The moral of the story is go home and read books, but they decide to tell it through, like, the most nightmarish visuals in the world. It's so frightening in places. And maybe that's why I've forgotten most of it, because I would have spent the horror section with my head behind a pillow when I first watched it.
I think that you had to do that. Just regardless, yeah.
Even when you rewatched it this week in your 30s.
Like,
Are you in your 30s?
I am in my 30s.
Oh, thank goodness. I thought I'd like...
I mean, stage age, you. 26.
Of course. 29.
So I think there was that element aimed at kids, but there's a lot of things in kids' films that are aimed at adults and stuff like that.
Of course.
So I liked some of the little sort of cliche bits that they sort of touched upon, but... So any adult watching it, you'd be like, well, we know what's going to happen here. But the kids, it was approached in a way that if you didn't know that...
That's so true, actually, the way that, like, So Macaulay Culkin is a kid and he gets turned into an animation and he's joined by 3 books. Fantasy, who's voiced by Whoopi Goldberg. Horror, who's voiced by Frank Welker, who also did the voices of the lions in The Lion King, as in like the roars.
He
it's
did
like him and a bin.
so many things.
Yeah,
he was
he's
Pegasus
astounding.
in Hercules.
Basically, I think anytime there's an animal, especially, and you can hear it in his voice, you can hear how versatile he is. I don't know who, then you've got like a pirate book, like an adventure book.
Yes.
Who voices that?
That is Patrick Stewart. That's the correct response.
I did not realise.
Nor did...
My apologies, Sir Patrick.
I knew it was Patrick Stewart, and I've known it's been Patrick Stewart for a while, so I was so, I was expecting, this is obviously going to sound like Patrick Stewart, but I didn't know who that was when I was small.
Because he only has one voice that he does.
But no, he's a pirate book.
He's a fully pirate book. He is like Tim Curry in Muppet Treasure Island, which will not be the first time I make a reference to that movie in this episode, but he fully leaning into that astounds me. Yeah, that is incredible.
It's like the cast with it. It was probably the first time I heard Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Stewart.
Well, this is 94, so the other movie that came out in 94 was The Lion King, which Whoopi Goldberg also has a voice acting role in.
She does. She's
very
she's
different
one of the
characters.
hyenas.
Yeah, Shanzi. She's like
that was it.
fucking insane. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And this is so. She gets to have her Whoopi Goldberg. Every time I've seen Whoopi Goldberg and anything, she has this like bit where she sort of like is very chaotic and wild, and then like brings it back in. Like that's very often what I've seen her do, and she does that 100% in this, which I think is quite nice because they easily could have made fantasy this like pushover character, but by casting Whoopi, they made her someone with like gumption.
But I think that works really well for the character of fantasy as well, because there's a lot of bits where she's lovely and sweet and batting her eyes and flying around with her little fairy wings and her wand, but then will just like smack someone and scream in their face.
Yeah.
Which a lot of the old fairy tales and a lot of fantasy does do.
Oh, God,
it's all, there's the princess and the prince, and isn't this lovely? But she's tangled in thorns, been asleep for a century, and there's a dragon that eats everyone.
And now she's blind, and I mean, when you the further back you go for fairy tales, the worse they get. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's very, even if it wasn't thought out and they were just like, fuck, who's available, who's the big name, who can we attach to this, who's willing to do it, even if that was the case, like it paid off. Like, well done, lads, you did it, you nailed it.
And spoilers for later in the podcast, when they're in the horror section and they meet, there were 2 bits that I really loved about this, where they meet Dr. Jekyll / Mr. Hyde, voiced by Leonard Nimoy.
No. Oh my God.
Again, don't think I would have experienced him until that film.
Yeah, because I wouldn't experience him until Atlantis in 2001, Lost Empire, Disney.
Who was he in Atlantis?
He's the like king of Atlantis.
Oh shit!
The
so
like
he
dad
is.
of the hot one.
Sorry, should I swear on this?
Yeah,
show?
you can fucking swear.
Ah, awesome. Oh, poo! It was him. Yes, it was. I don't think I'd made that connection. But I really loved him in that, and something that I liked. Talking about the cliches and stuff, when they go into the house, there's a sign that says resident Mr. H. Jekyll, and underneath, scratched in, is and Mr. Hyde. Fantasy reads that. So even if we, as the audience, do know, horror might know that not to go in there. But fantasy would never have read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so she wouldn't know. So she's like, huh.
Seems legit.
That's fine.
And again, as a kid, I guess you're being introduced to these characters. So you're right. As an adult, I was like, well, obviously.
Stupid books with their limited knowledge.
Stupid books you never heard of. Because in the adult in me, I think I even wrote, the adult in me was like, I wrote some pithy comment where it was like, why I'm sure kids love the original allegory for toxic masculinity. It's like, I'm sure you've picked fucking, oh God, what's his name? Who wrote Kidnapped in Treasure Island? Whoever wrote
Robert Louis
Stevenson. I'm sure the kids are all up in Robert Louis Stevenson's bibliography, like with his miniature allegory for Victorian society and toxic masculinity. And then I was like, shut the fuck up, Emily. You watched Muppet Treasure Island and you fucking loved it. And you attempted to read the book afterwards because you loved it so much, but still found reading really hard and boring. So you just watched Muppet Treasure Island and you still got the story from it, which is what books are all about anyway. So, like, it's fine.
There's no Muppets in the original one. Why would you bother reading it?
Exactly.
I won't read a single book unless it's got Kermit the Frog.
That is your rule that you live by.
That is my rule and I stick by it.
I love that. What are your boundaries? I don't read a book unless Kermit the Frog is in it. Valid. Very valid.
I will not be moved on this.
I'm sorry. I love that. Yeah. And again, we have a whole Treasure Island segment in this. And to me, it was really interesting, my understanding of Treasure Island, the story from the Muppets, who, shout out to the Muppets, they always do very, very accurate as they can, adaptations of literary classics. I demand one a year. I think Baz Luhrmann should do all of Shakespeare and the Muppets should do all of the literary classics.
Yes.
And I don't see why they haven't yet. I don't see why I'm still waiting.
You could even have a little series of, like, the Canterbury Tales.
Oh, my God.
You could get rid of the horrible bits out of that by just having Miss Piggy go, hi-ya, or something.
Exactly. Oh, my God. Yes. I love it. They should bring that back in a big way. But yeah, so I would shut myself up because I was like, shut the fuck up, like, it's fine. Like, and as you say, like, an adult will be like, ho, 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 such fun. And a kid will be like, well, what the fuck is going to happen? Like, this is crazy. It's nice that they kind of start off with horror because I'd have thought they'd have finished with horror. But it makes sense because by finishing, then they go through adventure where they do Treasure Island, Moby Dick, and then they hit fantasy where we could have had a woman. But we didn't. We had a dragon. I'm being a bitch again because it's like, because this is, I think the trouble that I find is that, like, unfortunately, it's a bigger problem than the Pagemaster is dealing with. Like, when you think of a literary classic and then you try and think of one with a female protagonist, unless you go Wendy or Alice for Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, because we're in that sort of Victorian classics, we've got your Treasure Islands, your Hand of the Baskervilles, your Moby Dicks. When you're trying to think in that era, if they met Elizabeth Bennet, what would she do? Would she be like, well, I'm actually on my way to Pemberley right now. Would you like to take a walk through a muddy field with me and discuss the restrictions of society and how frustrating it is while we do some cross-stitch? It doesn't quite ring as...
It wouldn't have necessarily kept the energy up through the film.
Or like Jo March, she'd be like, well, I'm actually on my way to Laurie's house. We're going to go ice skating. And I think it's because female protagonists, books written by women, tended to reflect the society that they were experiencing for whatever reason. I'm sure somebody much more clever than me has written a whole thing about it. And so there's very few, especially within that era, adventure books. So even when you look to the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, great film, embedded graphic novel, Mina Harker from Dracula is the leader of that group, and she's the only woman because they were a bit like, fuck all us out there.
Yeah.
And again, if you met Mina Harker, you'd be a bit like, this is probably a bit too much for a kids' movie.
Yeah, they did. I mean, it felt like the scary bits, they went pretty hard in this anyway.
Even the Baskerville Hound that comes out of the Hand of the Baskerville
that rips
books.
its way out of the book just as one of the first jump scares.
It's like, what the fuck? This is terrifying. Then Dr. Jekyll's transformation is fucking petrifying.
Yep.
Even the squid coming out of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I'd be like, fuck off.
Because it's just so big, and I'm like, okay.
It's very scary.
No, don't like that.
I
love the Jekyll one because he's very animalistic, almost like ape-like or something in the book.
Yeah.
In a lot of TV adaptations, at least that I've seen, like in Jekyll with, not Neil Morrissey.
Yeah.
James Nesbitt.
Yes.
Like he became almost more, not sophisticated, but his suit became trimmer, his hair slicked back. It was probably a way to
suave villain.
It might have been a new way of saying, well, he's predatory in a different way, sort of like that way. But
it's also easier to sell if your hide is hot.
Excuse me.
You heard.
All I heard was, well, nobody Hyde is hot.
It's easier to sell if your Hyde is hot.
If the bad guy's the sexy bad guy.
You can do posters of like Hannibal's hot now. You is hot. If you make your Psycho hot, it's an easier sell than if you make him like a gibbon or whatever he's described as in the book, which is, unfortunate because I don't think I've seen the one. When I think of Jekyll and Hyde, all my brain shows me is the filmed version of the Broadway musical Jekyll and Hyde with David Hasselhoff. And it's him going from Jekyll to Hyde.
But
please look it up if you haven't seen it.
It's really funny, but also
really
I looked and that's a really clever way of making one person two characters, and quite impressive with him singing it as well because
it's very
he almost interrupts himself.
It's so
Valjean
good.
and Javert arguing, but they're the same person.
Very cool stuff. So I like how much time we get with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde here. I like that he pours his potion into a martini glass.
Yes. Does he pop an olive into it? And then it gets spilled and it eats through the floor. What is that olive made of? I'm just going to pop in my titanium olive.
Oh my God.
But I like that he's really like monstrous and like his teeth are all down and he's hunched and he's hairy and he's
quite frightening. And what's nice is that at the very beginning, Macaulay Culkin slips and falls and looks up at the ceiling.
Ceiling of the library has a big mural.
A big mural with the Pagemaster in the middle, and the Pagemaster is Christopher Lloyd, who is also the library master. And there's actually put a pin in that because I'm just going to do the mural for now. In the mural, you sort of see a menu of what's to come. You have a painting of every bit that we're about to encounter from every book, which I think is quite a lovely touch. And
also, in the opening credits, because films had credits at the beginning back then.
Back in the olden days.
It's all smoke and stuff, and the smoke makes the shapes
of like dragon in a night.
House,
and
the night.
Yes, it's so cool. It's very, very cool.
And then that is what we see on the mural.
On the mural. And the bit with Jekyll and Hyde is just a shadow. So we don't know what he looks like until he comes out of the shadows, having transformed in the most frightening way since the Snow White transformation, which I think was banned in its first release because it was too frightening.
Really?
I think so, which doesn't sound like something that would have happened now I'm saying it out loud, but I've always heard that it was like cut from the original release because they were like, it's too frightening. Or maybe it was just dampened down. Anyway, when she turns, it's nightmarish. And this is nightmarish, and we don't see it until then. I want to loop back to Christopher Lloyd so he's the library owner. Obviously, Macaulay Culkin comes into the library and obviously it's empty because kids aren't reading books these days. They're too busy riding their bikes over ramps on building sites.
And shouting mildly aggressive things to the passers-by. Hey, you, keep on stepping.
Yeah. I did love the way that this was written. There were some phrases in here that you don't really hear nowadays, like... I think at one point he thinks some of the books are dead, and when it turns out that they're not, he says something like, boy, oh boy, I thought you were a goner. Like stuff like that you just don't hear anymore. And I was like, oh, what 90s child was like, gosh almighty.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, I thought you were goner.
I wish oh boy would come back.
I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to bring oh boy back. And this is what always got me with the Neverending Story. How in on it, and I love that it's not told to me explicitly, so I can make my own mind up. How in on it is the book owner to what's about to happen? Does Christopher Lloyd lure children? Because I always thought...
Wow, that's so not where I thought you were going to go with this.
But, the implication, to me anyway, was that, yes, there was a storm the night before and the storm's happening again, but it feels very specific, like the way the lightning hits the posts and then the lights are coming out, because the crux of Macaulay Culkin's character is that he's a statistic freak and he's like, did you know that 70% of accidents happen in the home? Which, unfortunately, then he has, whatever it is when your anxiety is, proven right, so it's never going to go away. He's like, Dad...
Confirmation bias?
Yes, and it's like, 70% of accidents happen on ladders. we're talking 11% here, Dad. And then his dad does fall out of the treehouse and out of the ladder. And it's a lovely lesson because you're a bit like, well, you know, stuff happens, but you can get back up again.
Mm-hmm.
But
if you drop a bucket of nails on your dad's head and he tumbles out of a tree,
he will fall out of the tree.
He'll be fine. Because it's not that kind of film. Yeah. But be careful out there, kids.
This is the thing. It was a bit sort of like, you know, he had to be a bit braver. He had to face the world a bit more head on. It breaks tradition, this movie, by having the dad not be a piece of shit often.
Right? The parents are actually like
horrible.
Nice parents in this.
Yeah, they're like really understanding.
The worst thing that happens is the dad is like, oh boy, I wish he was just a little bit less afraid of the world because I care about him.
Because I love him.
And you're like, what? Wait,
I was
shouldn't a parent be dead or abusive at this point?
Yeah, like Jumanji called. It needs you to like traumatize Macaulay Culkin into like growing up. You know, everything else, all of its contemporaries had dads, because it would very often have the like dad-son relationship. And it's very often that the dad is working too much and the kid is alone at his baseball game. This isn't it. The kid is just very frightened of the world. I mean, it spoke to me as someone like riddled with anxiety. I was like, yes, that's how I was as a child. And perhaps this would have cured me. But unfortunately, the cure is to like stay indoors with the window shut, but like just read books instead. And it's like, is that a cure? And also, he's already clearly reading books because he's not getting those stats off of Wikipedia.
True. But he's reading books wrong.
He's reading the wrong books. Got to read fantasy, not statistics.
Like, I used to have possibly because of this film, would like have a torch next to my bed in case of emergencies.
Yes.
What if all of the power runs out?
Yeah.
Or what if there's quicksand? All of the things that the
what
kids
if the
are worried
vampires get
about.
me?
And I think he's really like an amped up version of that.
Yeah.
And I don't think Christopher Lloyd lures children into the
No, I think where I was going with that is it's like, because the Neverending Story man is very much like, get the fuck out of my store. Mm-hmm. And he steals the book. And I don't know if and he looks at him when he leaves, and it always looked to me, I know I'm talking about a different movie now, that he was like, oh good, Bastian's left my horrible dusty shop. It's not horrible, it's lovely. My lovely dusty shop. But oh shit, he's taken the Neverending Story with him. Oh fuck. And it's not that he's like...
That's my longest book.
Yeah, I was still reading that. I don't think it was a pre-planned thing where he was like, oh wonderful, like Bastian's going to save... Oh my God, what the fuck is it called? Fantasia. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's that. This, at the end, Christopher Lloyd gives the longest look just slightly to camera in the world that indicates that, yes, he is the Pagemaster. He knows he's the Pagemaster. This all went to plan. He's broken Macaulay Culkin out of his shell. He's not done anything to help his own job. The library is not now filled with children. Macaulay Culkin coming to return those 3 books that he built a relationship with isn't then going to necessarily prompt him to get any more books out. Mm-hmm. It might. But he also doesn't have any friends to be like, hey, let's all go to the library. Like, they're not going to start busting out, having fun isn't hard when you've got a library card. Like, that's not gonna happen. So if that was Christopher Lloyd's plan, it's failed. If it was that he deeply cared about Macaulay Culkin's like cowardly state of being and wanted to fix him, I guess job done, because by forcing him to go through these adventures via books, it's almost like they want the audience to read books, but they want Macaulay Culkin to find his bravery. It's funny. It's just a little bit like, what?
I know the look to camera that you're doing, because, yeah, he runs in from the storm, and then he's like, oh, I don't want any books. I want the phone.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, yeah, the Christopher Lloyd's like, yeah, through there. If you get lost, find the exit sign and you'll make your way home. And then he gets under the mural, he slips and he bumps his head. Mm-hmm. And then we have an awesome CGI live-action cartoon bit.
It's so cool.
I think it's one of the first... It had live-action Macaulay Culkin running away from a CGI dragon made out of paint.
Yeah.
Everything the CGI dragon was hitting was then spreading and becoming animated. I said that weirdly. Animated.
Yeah. It was really visually fun to watch. And it began by these shoots of paint coming off
Big
the mural.
of...
Nightmare imagery of everything on the mural melting, like really scary.
Warping and twisting and, yeah.
Like, turning into this dragon that then chases Macaulay Culkin, who, like, scream, like just classic Macaulay scream. He spent that 90s screaming, poor kid.
He did.
But it's really, really cool. And then he finds himself animated, and the Pagemaster's like, hey, I'm essentially Glinda the Good Witch. I'll see you at the end. And they even make that
I'm
reference.
not the librarian, but I'm voiced by him and look similar. Make of that what you will.
Make of it what you will. So is Christopher Lloyd the Pagemaster with a human, and he's allowed to like have a human form?
Well, that's
like
the thing.
Sauron?
Because at near the end, when I can say the end bit,
Yeah.
when
Spoilers for the Pagemaster.
He's not stuck in the books forever. He does get out. He finds the exit, and then like he wakes up where he fell.
Yeah.
And then Christopher Lloyd's there, and he's like, "Are you all right? You cracked your head, something proper."
You should probably go to A&E.
Like
He's in the treehouse at the end, and he's fully just like
just
with
in a-
concussion, unconscious, and the parents are like, let him sleep.
out here. We don't need to wake him up.
Yeah, make sure
He'll
it's
be
okay.
fine.
It's the 90s. It's like, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your kids are?
Yes, comatose in the treehouse. Yeah. Right where I left them 2 days ago. Yeah. He's having a right laugh up there.
With his 3 books.
Very quiet with those books.
Yeah.
But he comes in and is like, "Oh, you've hit your head, something proper." And then he lets him take the books. So you're meant to go, "Oh, so it was in his head." So he processed all of his trauma with the with
a
the
bunch of
impact of the
references
fact
that he might not know in the first place.
and so you're meant to sort of think that, and then he looks at like, "Oh, is that what you think?"
Christopher Lloyd literally like
Stupid
turns
audience.
to camera and goes,
"Wink,
and you're like,
wink."
oh, I see. He is the Pagemaster.
Is magic.
So does he just have to wait for children to turn up into his library and hope that they bump their head?
Or maybe he facilitates the bumping.
That's the thing. Did he cause all of the lights to go out in the tunnel?
School trips to that library are a bloodbath. There's just like 20 passed out toddlers.
Oh, it's empty because all of the local schools have been like, we're never going back
Not
there.
going there.
Fucking the paperwork after that was a nightmare. All the parents complained. Oh my god!
Hospitals
and that's
full
why
of
they're all
bumped heads.
playing on building sites instead, because it's safer than going to the library. Oh god!
Don't read books, kids.
Honestly, but all the kids that are like, basically, there's a little bit of like traffic works, and there's a ramp, and all the kids are like flying their bikes off it because who gives a shit? And they see Macaulay Culkin and they're all like, "Hey, nerd, you're a loser."
To be fair, Macaulay Culkin does
He's a
have
loser.
a massive reflective thing the size of him on the front of his bike, a high-vis jacket, a hat, several
Like a
flashing
helmet,
lights.
a big
and
red flag.
A big red flag, and the whole thing beeps.
It's like, like constantly.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm annoyed and I'm only hearing it for like 2 seconds. Like, no wonder this kid doesn't have any
wonder he's
fucking
stressed.
friends.
This constant screaming bike.
Literally. So you understand it. And like, what's unfortunate is that they make a big deal about him becoming friends with these books now. But it's a library. You've got to return them, Macaulay. And you're technically only meant to have 2 out at the same time, which I found really funny point for Christopher Lloyd to make at the end. After all the effort he'd gone through to get Macaulay to take these books home, he's then like, you can only take 2.
Yeah,
and
you
he's
can
like,
only take 2 of
but I
them.
promised. And he's like, promised who?
Horror, I promised him. You promised who? This nightmarish book that I found.
Yeah. This book that's Frankenstein visually, Igor personality, but also Quasimodo in everything he says, which is funny because I don't think I would call Notre Dame de Paris a horror per se. But I think it has now been accused as such because it was part of that universal, when they were doing Frankenstein and Dracula and the
Yeah.
Wolfman, they were also doing The Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Like
Two
in-
things
in
that you
Van
might
Helsing.
be like, yes.
In Van Helsing,
yeah.
Hugh Jackman fights the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes, he does.
Because it's meant to be quite a sad story, Hunchback.
Yeah, it is. Because he's just traumatized and abused, and then he dies.
Yeah. I don't think he eats people
No.
or goes "Brrr," and smokes a big cigar.
No, he doesn't. Oh my God, you are bringing that back. I fucking love Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman. I love it so much, but I'd forgotten about Quasimodo. It's right at the beginning, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, because... No... Is it Quasimodo or is it Dr. Jekyll? Because he turns back into Mr. Hyde when he pushes him off.
Oh, it is. Yeah, because I was about to say he
But
cuts
it
his
is on
arm
the
off and the
Notre
arm goes
Dame.
back. Yes, it is.
And that's why you're probably confused.
Mr. Jekyll, and it is in Notre Dame.
Yeah,
so maybe
it is
that's
confusing.
They're like, oh yeah, there was probably a hunchback.
And I think they do make a reference where like somebody bangs a bell and he goes, the bells!
Yeah.
Which is, everybody can quote Notre Dame without knowing they're quoting Notre Dame. Like, so this book spends the whole movie going, sanctuary, which is Notre Dame. But I wouldn't call it maybe, I don't know. I mean, it is pretty horrific. And then we got to Treasure Island, and some very questionable pirates kidnap Adventure and Macaulay Culkin to get them onto the Hispaniola. Well, I can't imagine it's the Hispaniola, but they get them onto Long John Silver's ship. And they are not great.
They're not very nice piratey pirates.
Oh, yeah. And again, this was when I was in my pithy stage. The first page is pithy. I was like, what kid is understanding Edgar Allan Poe references? And it's like, if they're watching The Simpsons, they're getting it.
Yeah. I did love the Raven in horror just swooping down and screeching nevermore.
It's very fun. Because if anything, especially these days, I think if you were to watch The Pagemaster, I know I would, I'd be like, what is Raven saying nevermore? And then you'd find it, and you'd either find the Simpsons episode where they did all the Edgar Allan Poes, or you'd find the Fall of the House of Usher, which leans into that, or you'll find, hopefully as a kid, you'll just find like the poems.
I think I said like, what's going? I think my dad probably laughed at that. And I was like, "What's his name? Oh, it's Quoth the Raven, nevermore." I was like, "Oh, that raven's called Quoth."
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, which is what Terry Pratchett decided.
Called the Raven Quoth. So yeah, I think that's probably how I found out about Edgar Allan Poe as well.
Yeah,
was this? I found out,
which is awesome.
Introduction to so many.
I think that's it. Like, you've got an introduction to Sherlock Holmes, treasure, and you don't have to like even just. It's good to have. I think it's nice to understand literary references just as a thing. My dad is nearly 70, but he doesn't look it. So anyone that makes that point at him, he'll be like, "Oh, you should see the portrait in the attic that I have," and everyone's always like, either they laugh or they go, "What?" And then he's like mortally offended that they don't know the works of Oscar Wilde, and you're like, "Come on, man!" Like, it's some people just don't, and it's okay. But I think it's nice if you do, because then you can just make fun. I'm so grateful that the Barbie movie introduced a Proustian moment to the masses, because I would talk about having Proustian moments all the time and then have to explain like who Proust is, and that when you have a Proustian moment, it's where you like dip a biscuit in a cup of tea and it takes you back to a time when you were a kid and you were dipping biscuits into a cup of tea.
Thank you for explaining what a Proustian
you're welcome.
moment is to me.
And then Barbie has a Proustian moment, and then they make a joke about making a Proust Barbie, and then later on in the movie you see Proust Barbie, and it's just so Greta Gerwig, and I was so here for it, and I was so pleased. But it's fun. It just like enhances life, and that's what literature does, and that's what books do, and I think that's what this movie is making the point of. So it's really quite harmless. I've written what the fuck. What was that about? There would have been something that happened right at the end. I think it was literally right at the end. Oh no, it was when I thought we'd gotten away with it, and then I forgot what era we were in. Adventure and fantasy hate each other. Whoopi Goldberg spends this entire movie rolling her eyes, and it's really wonderful because it's valid, because Adventure is this sort of buffed up Il Capitano character who's very overly confident, and Whoopi Goldberg is so over it and not impressed. And then she forgets all that and makes out with him. And then he asks if he wants to have sex with her, and she slaps him.
I was about to say, do they not have like a... Because they hate each other, just sort of like a swell of emotion kiss, opposed to, oh, we like each other really. And then he says, how would you like to curl up with a good book? And then she just lumps him out of the little cave that they're hiding in.
Yeah, so he propositions her for sex, and then she physically assaults him, which I enjoyed.
But I think like in a lot of films and books and stuff from yesteryear, that would then be them together, and they'd get married.
Yes.
Whereas not in this, she punches him in the head.
It's so true.
I think he's all
and then
head.
Doesn't take him back. He's all her face, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then doesn't take him back. You're absolutely right. So that's that's good to see. And then the very like closing lines, which is unfortunate because when she first meets Horror, she's like making eyes at him and she's like, oh, he's cute. Oh, look, he's like really fun. But it was more like he was a puppy
like,
kind of way, which is really patronising.
He's
fantasy.
adorable.
It's not on, but check your behaviour, fantasy. And then right at the end, Adventure's like, oh, I fancy a kiss. And then Horror's like, okay. And then he's like, I meant from her. And then the credits roll. Adventure at one point gets put in a dress and it's like the worst possible thing that could have ever happened. Again, because they're following these sort of archetypes, these almost comedy archetypes, they're kind of getting away with it because it's very within character. It's not offensive.
Like Adventure being I'm the man. I also love that Adventure has an eye patch but also has two eyes.
Yeah.
So when he really needs to look at something, he just lifts up the eye patch.
I'm a huge fan of that.
But like he feels... Like, he feels insecure because he's so manly, which sort of comes a bit naturally to him, but then I think he catches himself if ever there's emotions or femininity in there.
Yes.
Again, possibly pointing out that books and stories like that do that, and it's not necessarily a good thing. And then he'll go... And
he does learn a lesson. He's much kinder to Horror by the end of it. They've become friends. It's sweet. It's a sweet little film. Was there anything in your notes that you wanted to bring up?
I mean, I liked that. I said about how fantasy is all like sweetness and light at points and then smacks you, like some fantasy things do. I like that that's like sort of all their personalities as almost portrayals and sort of caricature-y type things of the stories they're meant to represent.
Yes.
So like Adventure is very over the top.
The bravado.
And when he says, when he finds the library card on the beach, but just because he steps on it and can't get it off his foot, he then says that he had to fight like 6 man-eating sharks to get it out of the way. Like,
but
he
what's
always
nice as well is
over-embellishes.
that like fantasy is there rolling her eyes and not being like, yeah, okay, sure.
Like, okay, if that happens in your story, that happens in your story.
Yeah.
I really love that Horror is scared of everything.
Because Horror easily could have been frightening in itself. Horror's got such a fun design where he's got these sort of really long, lumbering arms and he moves himself around by that. And he's quite animalistic compared to the other two. But he's also like a massive coward, which complements Adventure quite nicely. And then again, fantasy being the token woman... This movie does not pass the Bechdel test.
Right, so films always used to have a song that went with them.
Oh my God, yes!
When did that stop?
I honestly wish I knew the answer because my favourite thing in the whole wide world is a song written for an animated kids movie that is played in the movie in character and then it comes to the credits and it's like Celine Dion version and it's so... insane and I love it so much. And so many animated kids movie songs are huge songs that everybody knows, but they came from animated kids movies. I mean, the biggest, most recent example is Happy was written for Despicable Me 2. But then you've got When You Believe, which was written for The Prince of Egypt, and it's Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston. You've got Looking Through Your Eyes by Leanne Rimes, but that was for Quest for Camelot. Like, there's so many out there, and obviously Disney have a counterpart. They'll have the character version and then blah, blah, blah. And this movie, I thought it was going to happen in Adventure, and then it didn't. And I was like, damn it, I thought it was a trope of the 90s that just at one point we would just break out into some song rather than having to write dialogue. And then we hit the fantasy realm, and we get it. We get a generic woman ballad 90s. I'm going to find it on Spotify and I'm going to play it to death because I loved it.
It's fantastic. And I loved the song. I loved the way that they used it as a little montage because, as we said, it is a very short film.
Yes.
It could basically be like a 25-minute part series or something. But then putting the song in, you got to see more of the things. It was a bit of montagey stuff, so it
breaks it up a bit.
So it shows that the world is bigger, and it feels like the film's gone on for longer. They got to play with the animations. The bit where he holds his hand out and the little firefly lands on it, but it's not a firefly, it's a fairy, but it's not got a body, it's just electricity bouncing around in a sort of body shape.
Like rotoscope of a ballet dancer.
Yeah.
But you know when people take those like light up glow sticks and they like sellotape them to themselves on black clothing and then turn all the lights out and do that. It was like they did that. They got some ballet dancers, they rotoscoped them, which is where you like film something in real life and then you animate over it. You can see it sometimes in different animations and it looks more real. And so they're doing ballet, but then they've done it so it's just like a crackle of electricity, sort of, and then every now and then you can see the shape of like their ballet bun and their tutu. Mm-hmm. I thought that was wonderful.
It's fantastic.
It was so cool. Just in the middle of this like kind of innocuous film that's not trying to do, it's not trying to be the Lion King or anything. It was just chilling, and then it's like really fun, interesting visual moment here. Yeah. Like, welcome. And I was like, and this is why fantasy is the best genre. Hands fucking down.
I will accept this, yes. Like, it was, because the animation for the entire thing, it's not Disney.
It's sketchy.
It doesn't try to be Disney.
No.
And it was still quite early.
It serves a purpose.
Yeah, but it works because they're all a little bit different, but they're all the same. And then there's just these little dancing
magical
buddies.
Like moment where you're like, and because it's so different to everything else that we've seen, it is magical. It really does stand out.
Mm-hmm. I really liked it.
I liked it.
I found out today, whilst I was doing an extra little bit of research today, guess what this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
Oh God, what?
19%. This after we've gone on about this for like 45 minutes, it is also worth just saying this was apparently a terrible film.
Yeah.
It cost $34 million to make. It got 13.4 in the box office.
What was it up against? Was it trying to... I mean, it was up against The Lion King.
It was up against The Lion King.
I mean, one of the, like, great... I really like the Pagemaster. I think it has value. I'm such a fan for these little odd animated features that sort of flicked around in the 80s and the 90s. I know why this has 19%, because it doesn't have a plot. No one, it's not memorable. It's not taking characters from A to B in any meaningful way. No one really has any major character development. Macaulay Culkin does play in traffic at the end, and that's his sort of character arc. I'm not saying that those things aren't there, but when you consider something like Jumanji that has such massive set pieces and the dramatic father-son relationship that gets fixed and how it's fixed through the movie and all of these things, you can see why the Pagemaster sort of slipped under the wire.
It's the character development is Macaulay Culkin is scared, and then he goes into the books, and then he's scared, and then he's scared, and then he's scared a little bit less.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the film, he's not scared enough to ride home without all his safety gear.
Yes.
And do a little jump and sleep in a treehouse. Yeah,
which he didn't go in the treehouse at the beginning of the movie. So
there is a character, but it's all subtle.
All it is as stuff. Well. There's sort of nothing else. It's not even like
they don't save the planet.
It's not big, and it doesn't have to be big.
They don't stop the big bad thing.
Because we're sort of there's a lot of like moments where it's just sort of like things are just sort of happening where it's like, oh look, we're in. They spend 5 minutes being like, we're in adventure now. We watch the sunset, and then Horace's like, oh, can I come up there? And he's like, no, I want to be up here. And then Horace's like, oh, okay. And then Adventure's like, okay, let's go down now. Oh, look, there's a boat. And that's taken 5 minutes. And I'm like, no, they haven't. So I get it. They had an idea. Somebody had an idea, and they did it. And I'm so proud of them for doing it. Mm-hmm. Could it have done with a couple of weeks in the writing room could it have done with a bit higher budget on the animation? Could they have really thought about what they wanted to really, really say? Could it have had more women in it? All of these things. But for what it is, it's charming. I think it's a forgotten, not classic, but certainly
It's
like
a
classic of its time.
One of my little gems.
Yeah, definitely. Like Fern Gully. The amount of time I have a Fern Gully t-shirt, and the amount of times people in the street will be like, yeah. And I imagine it would be the same with the Pagemaster. It's because it did badly, it would have been really cheap on VHS. So everybody would have had it in their house.
It isn't
and everybody
anymore.
would have had. What do you mean?
I went to go and buy it on Amazon on DVD. And it was like 20-something pounds.
That's the thing. I think because nobody's watching it until somebody really wants to watch it. And then they're kind of probably willing to fork out £20. But you can also watch it on YouTube for free. Where can the people find you? Who are you? What do you do?
I do a podcast, The Conversation Hat. Me, and my buddy Liam pick out questions from a hat, a multi-dimensional hat. And we try our best to answer them. Sometimes it's just us. Sometimes we have guests on, like your lovely self. At Conversation Hat on all the socials, you'll find us. I am at Spike Pearson on Instagram. I do some foodie stuff and I just sort of wander around the world.
Love it.
And some pictures of me will be on there. The same as basically anyone else's Instagram account.
You know Instagram. It's like that.
It's like that, but with more me.
Yeah, specifically me. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been fun.
Yay!
Let's go and make Home Alone for the spooky
9. Yeah, the spooky wookie boogaloo. Spoogaloo.
We'll workshop the name.
Yeah, okay. We'll see you next time on Why This Film.